Hey there, my name is Zach Gollwitzer, and I come from a much smaller YouTube channel than the one you're watching right now. And because of that, I want to give a huge thanks to Brad for having me on the channel today, and just think it's awesome what he's doing, allowing smaller creators like myself to come on and speak to a larger audience like this. Since the title of this video is the challenges that you might face as a self-taught developer, I thought it would be probably appropriate to share just a little bit of my story. So I started programming about 4 years ago, I think at this point. And back 4 years ago, I started out with the CS50 course from Harvard, and it was an awesome introduction to computer science for me. And then after that, I went down the road of, a bunch of online tutorials. And that's actually where I found this channel right here. And I ended up taking several courses from Brad on this channel, and it was what got me started ultimately. I still remember there's a video series way back if you scroll past probably 100 plus videos since then, but there was a mean stack series done on this channel right here that I had actually watched to write my first web app. At the time, I was having a little bit of difficulty making any forward progress. I felt pretty stuck in my journey. It had been about, 4 or 5 months at that point. And I had gone through all sorts of online courses and assisted tutorials, building web apps out and building projects, but I hadn't actually done it on my own for once. And so what I did was I watched the Mean Stack series on this very channel, and then for the next 5 days, I told myself I got to create a brand new web app every single day for the next 5 days. And that's what I did, and I really considered it kind of a turning point in my journey as a self-taught developer, because it was the first time that I had pretty much gone unassisted and created a full web app with user authentication and all sorts of those things. Nothing fancy those 5 days, but it really got me started, and I have to give a lot of credit to this channel specifically for helping me, make that jump and get started. And that's actually what I want to talk about today, is 3 of the most challenging things about being a self-taught developer, where you don't have any sort of formal education. And in my case, I kind of consider a self-taught developer someone who simply doesn't have a degree in, a computer-related field. Now, before we get started going through some of these challenges that I faced, I want to kind of flesh out this term self-taught developer, because I think it's a term that we use a lot here on the internet. Makes sense considering that most self-taught developers learn everything that they know on the internet. But I want to talk about, a self-taught developer is not the most descriptive term, because if you think about it, almost every developer that you meet is going to be considered self-taught. And the reason is, by nature, a programmer is someone who is good at problem solving and good at going out and finding solutions to things and learning new things. And so it doesn't matter if you're someone who has no college education and who learns everything that they know using online courses, or someone, a tech lead at a large company like Google. No matter who you are, you have to be able to learn. You have to be able to, push yourself to learn those new technologies as they come out. That being said, there is a difference in the path that someone might take, going the formal route of a college education straight into a programming job versus, maybe a non-technical degree and then eventually learning programming. The path is going to be a little bit different, and that is what I want to talk about in this video today. All right, so let's jump into this. I think the first thing that I have to talk about that's so common amongst people who have taught themselves to code without any sort of formal education, and especially someone who hasn't worked, full-time at a company yet, is that imposter syndrome. Now, in my situation, I write a lot of smaller scale web apps. And I actually have a golf website that I've written a few web apps for. And it's by no means a super small website, but it is nothing compared to some of these large corporations that have to create these massive application systems. So when I'm writing these applications, every once in a while, I get to the point where I'm kind of questioning, like, hey, how would someone at Google do this? How would a lead developer at Google write this? Am I solving this in the most straightforward way? Is this the right programming language for the job, or the right framework? Or, there's a bunch of questions, a laundry list of questions that can go through your head as a self-taught developer when you don't know, how someone else would operate in your same situation. But here's the most important part. When you're a self-taught developer, you can ask all of those questions. You can endlessly try to decide between what, language or framework that you're going to use. But in the end, you have to make a decision, and you have to write the code, and you have to ship the product. And that's what it comes down to. In the end, it doesn't really matter what's behind the scenes, unless, of course, it's so sloppy that you yourself cannot even, go back and maintain it. But the reality of the matter is, if you create a useful software product, then it does not matter how you created that. Now, as we're talking about this imposter syndrome that most self-taught developers are going to experience at some point, it's not all doom and gloom. In my experience, there's a lot of positives to being a self-taught developer, and there's some skills that you actually pick up along the way that someone else may not have. And one of those things that I feel is something that I've become very good at is debugging things. And the reason is, when something breaks in my applications, the only thing that I have is Google and Stack Overflow. If I can't figure it out with, Stack Overflow, then I've got to actually dig through the code myself. I can't just get up and walk over to a coworker or my boss or superior and say like, hey, can you help me out with this? I have to do everything on my own, and it's quite a challenge sometimes. And I'm sure a lot of people who have done self-taught development for some time can really resonate with this and consider themselves pretty good at debugging code. Furthermore, there's actually a few strategies that I want to share with you, things that I've done for myself that have really helped me get over this. I'm sure everyone has their own way with dealing with this, but hopefully a few of these things help. As a self-taught developer, it's really tough unless you have, a ton of connections, to have someone as a mentor. Someone who is really good at writing code that can just help you with a lot of the questions that you have and teach you some of these best practices. So for me, what I had to do, and what I still do, is read through open source code. And usually I'm looking for things that are, open source projects that are written in the stack that I'm trying to write. But honestly, reading any sort of open source code is educational. It can really help you understand the best way to write code, because in many cases, the top tier developers are actually writing that open source code. So it's an awesome way to kind of pick up on some patterns and some practices that some of the better developers are actually using. Very similar to that first strategy, there's actually several repositories on GitHub that you can search for that have best practices kind of laid out, and there's several contributors to those repositories all kind of weighing in their opinion on what is those best practices. As you'll see, sometimes it's tough to agree on those, but in general, I love these repositories, and one of them that I can think of off the top of my head, since I write a lot of JavaScript code, and I'm assuming a lot of people that are watching, this channel do as well, is if you type into GitHub Node.js best practices, there's an awesome repository that just lays out a big list of best practices that you should be using. By no means do I cover all of these best practices when I'm writing apps. It's completely impractical to try to do that and get something done at the same time, but it is a good reference guide. I scroll through it every once in a while to see if there's something that I can pick up on and maybe implement in my next project. Another repository that I really like, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this name right, but GoThinkster Real World Applications. And they actually have several different frameworks kind of demonstrating how you might write different types of applications. I find those really helpful to just read through and kind of model my full stack applications off of. And then the final thing that I've done that kind of came later in my journey, probably around year 2.5 or 3 out of the 4 years I've been doing this, is actually sitting down and reading books. And when I say reading books, there's a lot of software books out there, but one to mention that I learned a ton from is Code Complete. And you'll see a lot of people recommending this book, and for very good reason, because it really lays out some of the decisions that you make when you write software. And not only that, but it also kind of goes into some of the best practices that you might be using regardless of what language you're writing in. Now, the second challenge that I have faced as a self-taught developer is overload of not only information, but also decisions. And what I mean by that is just all of the possibilities that you have, at your fingertips as a self-taught developer. Now, unlike working for a large company or, applying for your first job, where you have to have specific types of qualifications that kind of match up with the tech stack that company or subsidiary of the company is using, as a self-taught developer, before you're applying to jobs and stuff, you have ultimate freedom to choose not only the language that you're using, but also the frameworks that you're using and all of the tools, and it can get very overwhelming. And not only that, but you also have endless tutorials. I think it would be really nice, really easy on our minds if there was just one tutorial in the entire world on how to learn to code, because it would kind of remove those options. It's the same reason why a lot of people like Chipotle. There's only 2 or 3 options on the menu. It kind of removes that choice from the playing field. And so with programming, with self-taught programming, you have all of these different options and you have a ton of different information. And so it's often very difficult to actually choose your path. It's almost like that parable or something like that, where you have like a donkey who's sitting between a bucket of food and a bucket of water. And this donkey is equally hungry and thirsty. And so the donkey stands there and can't decide between each of them and ends up dying of starvation and thirst. And it's kind of the same thing for a self-taught developer. You can literally be standing right between Python and JavaScript, and it's so hard to make that decision that you end up getting discouraged and not learning either of them. And that is not what we want to do. But it is a huge challenge that I've faced myself, and I know a lot of other developers have as well. But in the end, just like, facing imposter syndrome and writing your app anyway, you have to commit to things as a self-taught developer. You can go through a lot of tutorials and explore a lot of different things, but ultimately you kind of have to commit to specific languages and frameworks. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in the middle and you're never going to learn any one language or framework very well. So as a self-taught programmer, you kind of have to accept the fact that your journey might take a little bit longer and be a little bit less straightforward than someone who maybe does a computer science degree in college and gets a job directly out of college that ultimately dictates kind of the stack that they're programming in. So as a self-taught dev, you kind of go in a lot of different directions, but it can be a silver lining in many cases. In my path, I wanted to try a lot of different things, and so I have been exposed to several different languages and frameworks because of that. Just don't get into that, that endless cycle of just a bunch of tutorials and never committing to something. And the final thing that I have struggled with a little bit as a self-taught developer is definitely finding community. And I know there's a ton of online communities, and this is not the case for someone who is a self-taught developer and a couple years later is in a job with people around them and stuff. I'm mainly talking about those first couple months or even years of your self-taught journey, because in most cases you're probably not going to have the skills to actually go out and get a job within the first couple months. And you probably don't have the financial freedom in a lot of cases to just quit your job and do it all full time. So for a lot of people, there's going to be an extended period of time where you are completely alone in your journey and you're not, connected in with different communities. Now, like I said, there are online communities. You've got YouTube, which we're on right here, and there are awesome communities just on YouTube alone. When I read through all the comment section on, even my own videos and definitely this channel, there's just a lot of awesome people that are watching these videos and kind of helping each other out on their journey. And that's a really cool thing. But there is a very big difference between, watching a video, watching someone on camera, and actually going out for a happy hour and having some drinks with them. And I especially think during this time in 2020, a lot of people have realized how important that community aspect is for job satisfaction and just having motivation to wake up and do the things that you do every day. So as with all the other challenges I've faced, there's a couple things that I've done to help out with this. One of those things is going to a coding boot camp. And I know that not everyone's going to be able to do this. Not everyone's going to be able to just drop what they're doing and go to a coding boot camp. And in my case, I didn't really get to, I only went to a 30-day boot camp. It's called the 42 boot camp, and they do a 30-day trial period to kind of test out your skills, and then you go back for a couple years. Let me tell you, being there with all those people was just an incredible experience. I was with 100+ people in the same room, all coding on the same thing, and it was just an awesome experience. So if you can, coding boot camps are obviously meant to get jobs, but one of the lesser known aspects of them is just taking a self-taught developer and putting them with a ton of other people, and you're going to make friends that you stay connected with for a long time. Another good option is hackathons. I've been to 4 or 5 hackathons at this point, and every single one of them that I've gone to, I've been a little bit nervous to kind of jump into a random group, because that's usually what I've had to do. But you end up meeting some pretty cool people, and it's really fun to stay up late into the night working on some sort of software problem with other people. It's a great way to kind of connect in with the community and experience what it's like to work with others in this profession. So I've been talking this entire video about all the challenges that I've faced as a self-taught dev, but in the end, the rewards are well worth it. There's nothing that would have stopped me from doing this over again. And, obviously I have a ton to learn, and there's many years in my future that I'll be writing code. But just going down this path and learning how to, speak that language of computers has been immensely rewarding. And it's well worth struggling through some of these things that you'll go through as a self-taught dev. So I wouldn't let any of these discourage you, and maybe try out some of the things that I recommended if you're struggling with them. But the moral of this story is that, yes, there are challenges, but there are also silver linings to being a self-taught developer. And in the end, it's all about what you're creating. I think the reason why a lot of people program is just the creativity that it allows you to have. And the fact that you can literally take something out of your brain and create a completely new thing. It's just the coolest thing, in my opinion, and it's well worth all of the challenges that come along with it. So I'll leave you with that, and I just want to say, if you are just starting your journey as a programmer, stick with it, and don't take this video as, oh, it's so hard and not worth it. I really wanted to make this video to kind of highlight some of the challenges that you might face, but just to be aware of them. That's all. You just have to be aware that these are challenges that you might face. But like I said, the rewards are well worth it, and it's just such a cool thing to be able to, write code and build the things that you want to build. And finally, as I said earlier, big thanks to Brad for having me on this channel. And guys, be sure to give a huge thumbs up for this video and subscribe to his channel. He's doing a lot of awesome things, has been for a long, long time. And if you're not subscribed to this channel, you absolutely need to be. All right, I think that's a wrap. Have a great day and keep building cool things.